So, how's everybody doing today? Alright, so this is level up your local development experience with Lando. I'm Aaron Feledy. I operate a one-man Drupal consultancy out of Chicago. I am qualified to talk about Lando simply because I've been using the heck out of it since it was its predecessor. I use it on every single project now. I love it. So I thought, hey, I'm going to come to things like these and tell other people about it and spread the love a little bit. So yeah, I am here to talk about Lando. Well, I'm sorry, not that Lando. You guys want to talk about the newer, better Lando, I'm sure. Okay, this one actually. So, interestingly, my notes aren't showing up here, but Lando is basically a DevOps, local development, make everything super easy for you tool. It's essentially a wrapper for Docker, so that you can spin up your local environments, defined exactly the way you like, the way you need. Super easy. You don't need to know Docker. You don't even know it's there, other than the fact that you have to install it once. Lando makes it super easy for you to do things. I wish my notes were here, but I'm just going to wing it, I guess. Okay. So first, a little background here. A short time ago in a galaxy really, really close, you may have had some options for the way you do things, or you have done things. You might have in-house development servers. I don't know if anyone still does this. I've seen it, and it's been a while, where, yeah, you just have a server in your shop, in the office, under somebody's desk that is essentially a clone of what's out there on production, and everybody terminals into that, uploads their files via FTP, and that's how it works, and it's awful. You can't collaborate. People are overwriting each other's work. Is anybody work on something like this? No? Yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen it, but yeah. And of course you have your native solutions for development. You install your whole stack locally on your laptop or whatever. Your laptop essentially becomes the server. The problem with this approach is you're kind of locked into your configuration. You set up a certain version of Apache, you set up a certain version of MySQL, and you have to configure everything manually, and if you need to change anything, it's really cumbersome. And you run into problems, of course, where everybody potentially has a different setup, and it works on my machine, but why not yours? All these different versions. Now this I'm sure some of you are currently doing this. I've spoken to some of you about it the past couple of days here. Then there's things like integrated packages, your WAMP, your MAMP, your XAMPP, Acquia Dev Desktop. They manage all these things for you, all your Apache, MySQL, all those things, so that you don't have to know how to configure it really. You just run it, you install it, and you get all the tools you need. But it's still kind of cumbersome. You still have to do some configuration yourself. It does help a little bit. You can maybe change versions of things based on your project, but it has to uninstall and reinstall, and it's cumbersome to switch things. And you still have the problem of different members of your team might be running different versions of things. And there's virtual machines. Makes things a little easier. You might be able to set up one virtual machine, spread it out to your team. That's usually pretty resource intensive. You You can closely mimic production, so that's that's a good thing. There's some tools to make building virtual machines easier, Vagrant and such. There's like Drupal VM. I'm sure some of you are using that. Kind of builds your virtual machine for you, so you don't need to know a whole lot about it. But again, getting set up can be difficult. You're going to hog a lot of resources. You got a bunch of virtual machines running. Then there are containers, the new fun Docker thing. Docker, you can mix and match your configuration and services. So you can have your different versions of your MySQL, Apache, whatever else. You can tie them together, build out your application, closely mimic production. It's cross-platform, so you can have the same configuration with all the members of your team, regardless if they're running Windows, Linux, Mac. Docker gives you, for example, Docker Compose, which is the ability to kind of configure all these containers, define these containers, your whole system in a config file. But it's still kind of cumbersome to get up and running. It's cumbersome still. And it's missing a lot of features that you might want as a developer. It's not necessarily easy to just spin up your Docker system and then access your Drupal site in a browser. You got to jump through some more hoops. So that brings us to Lando. Lando, as I mentioned, is a wrapper for Docker. You don't, like I said, you don't really have to know Docker's there at all. You just know that you start up Lando, you get what you need. So it's a free, open source, cross-platform tool. It's command line, and it manages essentially everything for you, so you can get up and running super quick, super easy. Like I said, you install Docker. Well, you don't even have to install Docker. Lando installer will install it for you. So install Lando, you're basically good to go. Now, how's that work? Okay, well, let me talk a little more about it. Okay, so you can easily mimic production, define all of your services, get all your versions set right. You can standardize your development environments and your tooling across all the different systems your team are using. It's got built-in integration for like Pantheon, where you can, for example, connect directly to their systems and pull down your whole site to your local without really having to do anything other than set up like your SSH key. From then on, you work with what's there. You don't have to be trading your SQL dumps and whatnot. Lando will just get it for you. Even if you're not using a Pantheon, you can easily script these things with Lando so that it can pull down your databases and whatnot. And I'll talk about how that works. So you store all of your configuration in a single version-controlled file. So you define all the pieces of your application, everything you need, and you just drop it in your project directory. And anybody who's running Lando on your team, when they get the project, that Lando file's in there. They just type Lando start in their console, and they are up and running with the full stack that they need to run your application. It also gives you the ability to easily customize and extend the tool. You can customize, build your own tools. Basically, tooling is commands. So you can type like Lando is the command you get in your console. Gives you a bunch of stuff you can do, but you can define your own. I can say like I want Lando deploy. I can make configuration that might kick off a script that handles preparing everything for deployment. Plus, it's got its own tools in there. You can actually override and customize them right in your Lando config file. Give these tools to your team. Yeah. So Lando gives you recipes. So it's obviously pre-configured start states. So I'm talking about how you can go into your config file and define all these your different versions of things. But maybe you don't need to be that precise. Maybe you just say, hey, I want to run Drupal 8, for example. That's all I want to do. How do I get up and running? Well, Lando gives you the ability to basically in your config, you just say, hey, I want to use Drupal 8 recipe. It's one line you add to there, and it gives you common sense defaults. It builds out, you're going to have the right versions of PHP and MySQL and everything else that you need to run Drupal 8. Your development tools, your common stuff, it just gives you what you need. You don't have to configure anything really. Just say, hey, I want to do Drupal 8. It does it for you. But you can then customize from there. So it's really powerful there. So Lando supports several base languages. So PHP, Node, even Microsoft.NET. You basically get these environments ready to go for these different languages. You don't really have to do anything to get up and running, other than set up maybe your favorite text editor.
You could in theory set up a container with that too, though, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to blank slide here, but I will talk about what should be there. So Lando gives you services. These are basically your Docker containers, which are things like your PHP, your Apache, the different tools that you need to run your application. Lando calls them services, so you can say I need the Apache service, and Lando will pull down a configured environment essentially for that. And you can define. You say I need a LAMP stack. You can define all these things out, and then you say also I need a node because I'm running Gatsby alongside this project, and you can say I need a node service to run also on my machine, and you will just set that up for you. So you kind of can see that. So all this is done in the Lando config YAML file. You can start, like I mentioned, if you can see there, the first line, it says you've got your name of your project, and then the next line is the recipe. This one's Drupal 8. Like I said, it pulls down all the different services you need, gives you all the same defaults. You can be up and running your Drupal site with no more than those two lines in your config. And what that'll do is, I call this one Drupal test. That'll spin up your whole environment. It'll build a proxy, so you can now go to drupaltest.lando.site in your browser without having to do anything else. It's done for you, and it'll pull up your Apache, your environment. All you have to do is put the code in there, and actually Lando helps you with that too. There's a command in Lando. You can type Lando in it, and it will ask you some questions. It'll say, what do you want to name this thing? What do you want to, what do you want to use a recipe? You can also say, I want it in it from GitHub, and you'll put in your GitHub repository, for example, and it will pull down your code and everything as part of the boot up process. So that makes things super easy. And in this one, I go, okay, Drupal true. That means, actually, that's not even necessary anymore. The latest versions of Lando give you like Drupal console functionality built in, and that's kind of cool too. Like if you're using like Drush or Drupal console, if you're using the Drupal 8 recipe, it gives you those built in already. They're already installed for you. You type Lando Drush, and it'll execute the Drush command in your container, in your environment. So you don't need Drush installed on your host machine at all. You know, it all gets executed inside your environment.
So that Drush is in this container, or you have to have a separate container for Drush?
It's in the, I believe it's in the app server, yeah, the Apache container is already installed in there. That one has been pre-configured for Drupal development when you use the recipe. But you can customize that too. You can say, I just want like a lamp stack, and I want to add my own container for things like, you know, Drupal console. You can do that. It gives you the ability to define those things. So yeah, you can, you know, any service you want to add, you can. So yeah, you get in this example here, I've got, you know, I say, okay, I've got a directory called docroot within my project. I just say, okay, webroot docroot, and Lando will tie the pieces together and make it so when I go to my Drupal test.lando.site in my browser, Apache is configured, pointed to that docroot directory in my project directory. So yeah, no configuring Apache vhosts or anything. It does it. And in this example, I say, okay, I want to run PHP 7.0 because maybe that's you know, that's what I'm running in production. And I say, yeah, that's what I want. It'll spin it up. It'll do it. Xdebug, true. Turns on Xdebug for you. You don't have to configure anything. You don't have to do anything. Pieces are pretty much tied together. You basically just have to turn it on in your IDE and you know, point to the right ports, and you got Xdebug up and running. And services, so in this example I defined some additional services. I want mailhog because I'm working, I want to test the mail functionality, but I want to actually use the mail server. Mailhog's a great tool if you're not familiar with it, where it basically just, it takes over the email functionality and gives you a UI where you can see the emails without actually having to send an actual email anywhere. It's also good if you've got a system that does send emails and you don't want it to go out anywhere. Mailhog will handle the email for you. And yeah, define the database. You can say I want a MySQL database. I want any of the various others. You define your versions. Lando's got all these pre-configured for you. All the common versions you might use. And if they don't have one that they officially support, it's still based on Docker containers. You can define different versions as long as they're out there. You can get them, have them part of your project. And in this one, actually that should be mailhog, but anyways, I can define proxy. I can add additional URLs for different services on my site. I have phpmyadmin in there. So if I had a phpmyadmin service, for example, I could say, okay, let's see, I've got it set to do that. Okay, let's say it's a mailhog service. Pretend that says mailhog, not phpmyadmin. And I want to be able to pull up that web UI that mailhog gives me. I can define in my proxy setting that I want it to be mail.drupaltest.lando.site. I want that URL to pull up my UI, and it ties that piece together with just those few lines. Lando gives you advanced tooling, which is, like I described earlier, the ability to define commands that you can execute against your application. In this example, you get, we're installing composer dependencies, copying assets between directories, on a single command. So in this example, I define, okay, I'm saying I've got tooling. I can say install That is really hard to see, I'm sorry. So, okay, I say I've got tooling, I described it, I name it install, so now I can type Lando install, and it'll execute my list of commands that I've defined here. In this case, I'm saying that in my app server container, which is my Apache container, I want to run composer install, and then maybe I've got a node service running as well, and I want to run some yarn commands in that node container. It'll do that. And then back in my app server container, I want to rsync some things and get some assets moved over, and that can be done in a single command. I say Lando install. It builds everything I need to be up and running. I define that myself. Super useful if you have to do some of these types of things to get your project up and running, or just even if you want. I was on a project where someone who was not a developer wanted to be able to test things as we were building them. This made it super easy. I could just give them, say pulling the code, type Lando install. They didn't need to know anything about Composer or anything to get it running. It, did everything for him. Good to go. And that's super valuable, being able to just share these tools like that, and it's just in your config file. It's just another example of something that I've done. Same concept where I want to make it easy. I want to be able to execute several commands without someone having to know something. In this one, okay, I made a command called db reset. So I typed Lando db reset. It runs an import script to import the SQL database. And actually, Lando gives you a command already. It's one of the built-in tools. You could say Lando, I believe db import is the command, and it will automatically dump your database and pull in whatever file you said you wanted to put in there. So you don't have to have additional tools for getting the latest database installed. Just Lando db import, and it does it for you. Yeah, in this case, so I import the new database, I do some cache rebuilds, I do the Drush DB update, do a config import with Drush, basically get everything in the database ready to go, single command. So anyone on the team, regardless of skill level, they just type Lando DB reset and it's done. And here's an example. Should maybe bigger. Oh well. Another example, I've got one here called it deploy Drupal. So I type Lando deploy Drupal, and it kicks off a script. So you don't have to define all of your commands within the config file. You can have scripts that live in your project, and Lando will execute them for you. And this example gives you the ability to pass through a command line switch essentially to your script. So in this one I go, okay, which environment, dev or stage? So when I type Lando deploy Drupal, Lando actually asks me which environment, dev or stage? And I type it in, and it will actually pass that my response back to the script. So you can make things interactive that way. So example of a decoupled type setup. So as I mentioned earlier, you can define your different services. You can have your Apache and everything else. You can have Drupal running. Even if it's as simple as I want to use Drupal 8 recipe, you don't define anything else, Drupal 8's running. But now I also want to run a node service for my Next.js app or my Gatsby app. I want that in the project too. I just add a couple lines of config essentially. Okay, I broke this up into a couple pieces. So initially I can say, okay, I want to define my proxy setting. So instead of using the default URL, in this case I called the project decoupled. So by default, Lando would give me decoupled.lando.site to work out of in my browser. But I want to override that I want to call it a1cms.lando.site. So I go, okay, in my nginx container is where my app lives. When I go to that URL, point me there. Then I also maybe have a Node.js service called Node.js in this case. I want it to go a1web.lando.site, and actually can pass the port, because Gatsby, for example, you use port 8000, I believe, by default for the development environment. So you can define right in there. If I go to a1web.lando.site 8000, it passes it through to the Node.js container, and I have access to my Gatsby setup. And this is from the same config file, essentially, where I'm defining, okay, my services. I've got my Node.js service. I'm saying I'm running Node 9. I want to expose port 8000 to my host machine. And I'm also setting an environment variable to let Gatsby know the URL that I'm using for development. And that's useful to anything that needs an environment variable. You just define it here and it puts it in the container for you. Then some tooling in this setup. So I say I want to be able to run npm, node, or Gatsby commands. In this case, I don't really have to define anything because my node server already has the node command, the npm command. The service has that in there. So essentially, I'm just doing a pass-through. I told Lando, okay, if I type Lando npm, just pass it to my Node.js container. And then I've made a Lando tooling command here. So I type Lando develop. And if you're not familiar with Gatsby, the command, you type Gatsby develop, and it starts up a node, the server, and it gives you like live updates. So as you're making changes to your Gatsby site, you can get live updates in your browser. So you type, in this case, I typed Lando develop, and I've defined the command to actually say Gatsby develop. Gatsby is a little weird, a little wonky because you're running it in a container. So you have to tell Gatsby that you're using host 0.0.0.0 so it does its passive things properly. That's a quirk of Gatsby. But I just made a simple command, Lando develop, and all that's just there. Another thing that's great about Lando, you can go to docs.lando.dev, and everything you want to know is documented. It's kind of thing with a lot of tools is you're kind of digging around in the dark to figure things out. There's a ton of documentation on anything you could want to do. Lots of examples in there. Yeah, it's a really great resource. Definitely want to check that out if you're using Lando. Actually, that's it for slides. There was something else I was going to mention, but I can't remember what it is now. So I guess I'll open things up for questions. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of what the performance impact is of using Lando and Drupal versus bare metal stack on the machine?
So there is a little bit of overhead involved with you're still running your Docker containers run inside a VM, so you got some overhead with that, and there are so your containers are typically Linux. So if you're running on, say, a Mac, your file system is different, and there's slowness in the syncing of things between the Linux file system and the Mac file system. So you take a little bit of a performance hit there, and that's actually one of the things I was thinking I wanted to talk about. The Lando, they're working on ways to kind of alleviate that some. One of the big reasons you take that big performance hit is when it syncs your host machine to your container. Anytime you make a change, it's looking at everything. So if you have a huge vendors directory from Composer, Docker wants to look at everything and try to sync it all up and look for changes, and that is a big part of the slowness. And it's an experimental feature. You'd have to look through the GitHub issue queue for Lando to find the config, but you can add a config to your Lando file that turns off syncing on any directory you define. But most of the time, you probably don't need the updated vendors directory on your host machine. It just needs to be there for your application to run in the container. So tell Lando, or tell Docker essentially, don't look at these directories, and you actually get a huge performance boost in that case. And if you do need to say you're debugging something that's in one of those vendor directories and you want your IDE to see it, you can actually say, okay, exclude my vendors directory except for this other directory. So you can still have access to things locally if you need them. But like if you're doing like site building, you probably don't need access to your vendors at all. You speed things up a lot that way.
So if I want to have, so I'm assuming the Lando YAML is per container.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I?
Well, no, not per container. You define everything in a single file.
So how in the YAML do you differentiate containers and say nginx is in one, Gatsby's in another, redis is in another?
So the services section of your YAML config. So you say services. Hard to see here, but yeah, it's services, and I just say, okay, Node.js. That tells Lando use the Node.js container, so I've defined it. Here's Node 9, pulls down Node 9 container.
So each service is a separate container?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, and like, you don't even need to go as far as I've done here. You can just simply say services Node.js type Node. You don't have to define a version, it'll just pull down the latest recommended version.
So if I wanted to have like just a Drupal 8 MySQL, that's one thing. I share that with my team.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I want to have the D8 Gatsby Redis, whatever, that's another YAML config file, and we share that out separately.
No, still all in the same config. So still just you define it under that services section. You just your Node, your Redis, you define each one in the same file, and you can kind of nest it in there. You can get more in depth with your config if you need to. If the default container isn't going to work. But yeah, just that single file. So that's the big part of it is it's in there with your project. Your team doesn't have to do anything but other than maintain the one file.
Can you execute composer commands within the YAML file or cause them to be executed?
Yeah, so, well actually that's something I should have mentioned. Lando also has build tools essentially built in to where you can define in your YAML config, say maybe on the first build of your application, when it's downloading all the containers and stuff, you can have it execute specific commands. So you can say, yeah, the first time you build this, run Composer, do all these things that I need to get up and running, all defined in your Lando config. And you can use, or the tooling that I described, if you don't want that to automatically happen, you can make your own command that, like Lando install, for example, might kick off a Composer thing. Or you can pass in, if you're using other Composer commands, you can build your own tooling. But also Lando just gives you, if you're using like a Drupal 8 recipe or a LAMP recipe, any of them that would come with Composer already, you just get Lando Composer as a command that exists. So Lando Composer, whatever you want to do, and it does it.
So you got Drush 2 that way, right? I mean,
Right.
Lando Drush, right? So
Yeah.
can you execute Drush commands?
Yep.
That cause them to be executed?
Yep, same way. Just build it in your tooling or into the build steps, and yeah, it'll kick them off. Yep.
Tying into that, for doing things like Drush commands, is it doing like SSH key mapping into containers so that you can execute like Drush sequencing from a remote?
You'd have to define that. It doesn't do that automatically,
Okay.
but you could define that, and I've done it. And
Have you shared these with somebody who's on Windows and does this thing work well on Windows?
This is a Windows machine. It is my
This is
sole
an actual
development machine, and one of the big reasons I fell in love with Lando is because I'm a Windows guy. I'm a rare breed around these parts, but yeah, I love Windows. I've been like PC gaming, and I was in IT and in environments that only used Windows previous to doing development. So just Windows was what I knew, what I had, and when I started doing development on the side, I kind of dealt with the quirks of developing in Windows, and then it was originally Calabox was the predecessor to Lando. I stumbled upon Calabox. Not nearly as functional as Lando is, but it gave me that kind of ability to have these different environments, and it gave me Linuxy things on my Windows machine without me really having to do anything or manage Linux at all. So that was huge. Yeah.
Is that just overriding the host file then for domain name mapping?
No, it's actually got its own service, its own router for that kind of stuff, a proxy service that handles that for you. You can define if you don't want to use like the lando.site domain. You can go in your hosts and point things, but it doesn't mess with that.
So I was trying to find what exactly Drupal 8 recipe is.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? I mean, where does it come from? How's it built?
Yeah, so I don't know if I have an answer to that. Again, I'm a user, not a developer, so it's in there somewhere. I don't know if or where it's documented. But yeah, it's the same defaults, kind of tailor picked for the average Drupal 8 developer, I would say. But again, if you need if you want to be specific about things, you just tell it.
Like what version of Linux is it using?
Well, I don't know. Yeah.
VHAT testing, I know you can do that with Lando.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I managed to get it running partially.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do that?
I did once for a project, and it's been a while, and I don't really remember the pitfalls of that.
There are many.
Yeah. Yeah. I think because of being in the containerized environment, you kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But my main pain point is I really want to get screenshots for my VHAT test, and I have not, with all the Googling,
Right.
nothing,
Yeah.
nothing out there.
Yeah, and I don't have any insight into that part, unfortunately.
So you can actually do a GitHub pull via your lando.yaml file?
Yeah. Yeah, so I've find like if you're using a Pantheon recipe, it's already kind of built for you. You can type Lando pull, but if you want to build your own, we have scripted out the process and to pull down everything I need and define it as tooling. So I just type my Lando pull, it kicks off anything that needs to run to pull things in.
We're really finding like cool stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's all GitHub, just sort of GitHub. You know what I mean?
It's in the docs.
Yeah. All in the docs.
It's in the docs. And Lando actually will map your SSH keys into the container for you, so your keys are there. You don't have to do anything special. So you've got, and Lando actually gives you like Lando Git is kind of built into most recipes. So you type Lando Git, whatever clone, and your key's there, everything's there. So you can either define that as tooling, or if you only really need to do it once or twice, then say Lando Git and do what you need to do. Yeah.
Beyond specifying the type, can you specify either an image that you want to work from or a Docker file that you want to build from?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. You can get down to the real nitty gritty, and yeah, you can build your own Docker files if you want to, or find specific ones, and use those. Yeah. All right, anybody else? All right. Thank you. Oh, and also at the Lando booth, if it's still there, because I know Alex needs to get out of here and it might be getting torn down soon. If you like Lando, you use Lando, you want to contribute, there. trying to get people on board to help with the development, and to, if you don't maybe know enough about the inner workings of Lando to contribute, there's also a Patreon you can sign up for. If you sign up for the Patreon, you get a shirt. So.